You're listening to the Lean Six Sigma for Good podcast. We help you learn how Lean and Six Sigma concepts can be applied to nonprofits, NGOs, and not-for-profit organizations. Visit us at leansixsigmaforgood.com. Today, we've got Eric Moore here. Eric is a global director at Testo. Thanks for joining me, Eric. Could you give us a little background on your work experience and schooling and how you made your way into your current role?
Sure, Brian, thanks for having me. Hello to the audience. So my name is Eric Moore. I'm the Global Director of Food Safety and Industry Outreach for Testo. We are a sensor and software development company. We specialize in precision sensor-based software quality assurance data acquisition processes, as well as very high precision sensor technology in various different business units, food being one of those, also pharmaceuticals and the HVAC, gas and power industries. I have been a practicing food safety professional for a little over 25 years. I graduated in 1999 from Penn State University with a degree in hospitality. So I guess I can preface that my area of real expertise and knowledge is around operational food safety. You look at the supply chain in general, right? Things start at the agricultural end, right? At the consumer interaction end. My area of expertise and focus is very close to the consumer interaction piece. So when I say operational, it's really towards the end of that chain. After I graduated, I went right to work. I was very fortunate, had a job before I even graduated from college, working for the world's largest contract food service management company. I stayed with that organization for 12 years. I worked in what is called higher education. So I was in the dining services at a couple different universities. That's where I started to get a taste of the safety world, both occupational safety and food safety. It just clicked with my personality. I think everybody has an ability to want to continue and grow in their career, or at least I hope to do. And that was just an area where I was very intrigued in learning more. I ended up switching roles internally with that organization and relocating from New York City to the Philadelphia area. I started working in their sports and entertainment division. I was there for quite a while. My role as a food service manager shifted to being a full-time designated food safety professional. I was very fortunate. I had an amazing mentor at the time who really set me on a great pathway to build a really solid foundation of understanding the regulations that businesses need to operate under, but also understanding how to interact with employees, which is huge, especially in roles like that, because the old saying, you're only as strong as your weakest link, that is completely true when you're trying to manage, whether it's food safety or even just manage processes in large scale catered events. When I say large scale, like very large scale, 10,000 person.
Oh, wow.
It was pretty amazing. I got to support the 2004 Summer Olympics, and it was really quite amazing. You learn a lot about people, you learn a lot about process, and something that I've always had as part of how I work is trying to, I never made the connection until later in my career of how it relates to, say, like Six Sigma or lean processes. But I was always trying to, quote unquote, engineer the system so it was a little easier for people to do. Because to me, in those situations, it made a lot of sense to make their jobs easier for them to execute. That made my job easier. It was a self-serving thing to do in my mind, but it really helped along the way. I took on that role. And then after the Olympics, I ended up changing companies and taking on a larger role where I was not just overseeing food safety at one large facility. I was supporting a corporate food safety program for the whole Mid-Atlantic region. So then I was able to take a lot of the skills that I acquired in communicating with employees and making things easier for people to execute and start to apply them to writing standards and policies, keeping that core level of engineering problems or risk out of the system and applying that at a larger scale. That's also when I started to dabble with what at the time was cutting edge temperature measurement technology, right? These big clunky electronic thermometers, and they could do a little bit of data recording, and then being able to run reports and things like that. I stayed in that role for several years and then was recruited to go back to the company that I worked for right out of college to help rewrite their global food safety policy. That was a 3.5 year long project that was really quite amazing. Through all of these position changes, I continued to apply that same logic. How can we make this easier? How can we make things more streamlined? I always have it in the back of my head to engineer risks or problems out of the process.
Because I would guess, oh, maybe he had an engineering degree or something. I'm curious how.
Honestly, I think a lot of it was self-driven motivation to learn and stay abreast of the neat new devices that I might be able to test. And fortunately, some of the companies that I was working at, they were also being approached by thermometer manufacturers or other equipment manufacturers for input and feedback in the development of their devices. I was able to get involved in conversations like, oh, you know what, I tried using this and it's really nice, it's great, but it'd be really good if we could do this. So it was this grassroots way of getting into gaining some experience in how to use data to your advantage. From a time when it was just using Excel, creating some sort of basic pie chart or bar graph, in stepping things up into more advanced areas. And now I don't even know how some of this stuff works. It's gotten so far down the developmental pipeline. But I was just really fortunate. And I think part of the really interesting thing, at least looking back in retrospect, is that hospitality degree. They do a lot of education on spending time, how you actually talk to individuals, right? Whether it's customers or employees or managing up, they spend a decent amount of time trying to make sure, or at least they did when I was there, of giving you an idea of how to execute those conversations. I think that played a big role in being able to be successful over time in each career move. As my role or responsibility grew, I was always interacting with various levels of employees. Each employee group needs or wants to hear something in a little bit of a different fashion. Whether you're talking to an IT department where they literally just want, just tell me what you need from me, or up to the regional manager, vice president, CEO, they want to know even less. And they just want to know what it's going to cost or what it's going to save. Being able to actually share that information in the appropriate manner with the audience, I think has been pretty useful. That and the fact that also being able to take regulatory codified information and translate that into layman terms has been a huge feather in my cap over the years. Trying to read the FDA food code or parts of the code of federal regulation can be quite daunting for somebody that can read it, understand the requirements, and then say, this is what we have to do. And here's the actions we need to implement to make that change has been a big benefit. Through all those roles, I was gaining, acquiring, and applying various different skills. And all of that 8 years ago led to me joining Testo, where it was actually out of the blue. At the time, I worked for a startup. I was the second employee hired for my industry understanding, the people that I knew, at different organizations, at regulatory bodies, both federally and locally, and being able to help create pathways for understanding in this new technology. 8 years ago, a digital food safety management system was still pretty new to the industry, and it still is today. The adoption rate is still quite slow for various reasons I think we might even talk about here in a minute. But being able to provide a vote of confidence in conversations, whether it's with regulators or industry peers, software going to do for us? Why should I change? And being able to provide some of those benefit statements based on background and experience, I think has been really useful for me.
Yeah, that's great. A couple things came to mind that I wanted to go into before we jump into some of the data. tools and monitoring. But first, when you were working on campus, where was sustainability in that discussion at that time? Was that new? Was that something that students were asking for?
I think sustainability wasn't a huge push at the time. There were pushes around actively reducing unnecessary food waste. The activities then were different, still important now, right? But given how technology has changed in almost 25 years, the ability to expand how a company can focus on unnecessary food waste has drastically improved. When I was still working at a university, and this went up through some of my corporate roles too, the focus was on proper training of kitchen employees, culinary teams, right? What's the right place to stop cutting a carrot or pieces of celery? So you maximize the usage and decrease unnecessary waste going into landfills. There was a tremendous amount of focus on that. If you can adequately train your employees on how to quickly and effectively cut a watermelon where all you're taking is rind, right? That's a big difference between you're just like cutting it whimsically, right? And leaving a lot of the fruit still attached to the rind. You're just generating waste. And part of the cool thing was, along with the culinary teams that were in place at the time, we were able to start generating cost saving numbers, right? Because if you let somebody just work, an untrained, unskilled person, and they're wasting 2/3 or like an inch and a half of the end of a carrot or celery, and you have them start to put that in a container, you weigh that, and then you can translate that into, okay, if this trash bin weighs 10 pounds and that 10 pounds is going to cost me $10 to haul to the garbage site. If now I've trained you and you've reduced the weight of that container to 6 pounds or 5 pounds, you've reduced your waste hauling costs, right? And that helped get everybody's brain going. Oh, that's a way for us to save money and return money to the P&L. And that makes everybody happy, right? at the end of the day.
Was there composting? Was that an option at the time?
That really came along later. I was really working in the dining halls, but composting absolutely did come along. When I worked for a regional grocery store chain in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland area, I just saw the enormous amount of food waste we had. So I started a composting program. Over a 5-year period, we diverted something like 400 metric tons of food waste. When I was trying to figure out what we could do, I evaluated composting in comparison to the food being re-engineered into animal feed, right? You have to be a little bit more cognizant. There's more employee engagement because it's not just every single food scrap that can go in a trash can. It's vegetables, fruits, cheeses, eggshells, because it was all getting turned back into cattle and swine feed. You can't put beef scraps, right, fat or bone in there. So I actually also started a program to try to capture that waste as well, so that whether it's beef fat that can get melted down or beef bones that can get repurposed for chew toys or whatever, we started a program for that as well. And there's a lot of metrics there, a ton, like lots and lots of metrics that can be measured there. And that was wildly successful. And as far as I know, it's actually still in place today.
I was part of a green team at my previous company, working with cafeteria services and trying to figure out what are some of those options. And food waste was a discussion, tracking and weighing that. I think that was something that had in place. We were trying to figure out what could we do with that data to see if there's opportunities to see what are the highest weighted items that are coming in there. And so I found that pretty interesting. And we were trying to set up composting and reusable plates and some things like that. So that's reminding me of some of that work.
It's several universities, I'm certain they're probably still going on. Instead of purchasing commonly grown herbs, they were starting to grow their own. They would use a building roof to grow like certain volumes of some like fast growing vegetables that they would use in their cafeteria, right? If you're not ordering from your food vendor, you're taking those greenhouse gases out of the system. There were activities that were going on relative to that too, but a little harder to put numbers around when you're using a broadline distribution partner. You can't really collect emissions data and things like that.
Food safety and sustainability, is there situations where they may conflict? I think about reusable containers. I was doing a big push and I lived in Portland to try to get more people to bring coffee cups to their favorite coffee shop. But there's always that risk of what if it's not clean and someone's handling it? Did that come up in some of the efforts? This is the right thing to do, but the risks to safety or spreading disease.
There's a group called the Conference for Food Protection that meets every 2 years. The meeting is in 2 weeks in Denver. That is an area where industry, regulatory bodies, both state and federal, academics, and consumers get to come together and propose new parts of the food code. What is proposed then gets evaluated and whether or not the FDA will adopt it. And reusable containers actually was a very hot topic, and it has been for like the last 4 years. So it was actually formally introduced into the food code 2 years ago. Some forward thinking large organizations had already started moving forward with that, especially universities. When you bring universities up, they're typically at the tip of the spear, especially around sustainability, greenhouse gas reduction, reusables, recyclables, compostables, like all of those things. It's usually a very good audience to communicate with. But when you start to factor it out, like in your example with a coffee shop, or if you even think of reusable bags at a grocery store, there does become questions around, could that container lead to some sort of issue, right? Where it becomes the vector of something that gets spread to many other people. There are ways that you can put policies or processes in place. Maybe you have a favorite pub or bar or a coffee shop that has a mug club. You're reusing a mug, but they maintain the responsibility of storing it. They also clean and sanitize it before it then gets reused. There are ways that you can create policies or procedures around that. If I were to go into whatever coffee shop and I said, hey, can you put my coffee in this? And they'll say, absolutely, yes. Especially if it's not a self-service place like a gas station where they'll actually take it and clean it right in front of you, just like you're getting a drink at a bar. They'll just wash, rinse, sanitize your travel mug, and then put your coffee in. It becomes an organizational question of, do we have the equipment in place already to do that? If we do, let's get some employee feedback if they're okay doing that, or is this going to get on our employees' nerves? And then that could actually have a negative impact on customer interactions. But if everything goes positively, then we'll build a policy around that. And absolutely, let's do it. Some successful examples of that, and again, I'll go back to the university dining scenarios, is the use of food safe plastic containers for takeaway meals at a cafeteria. What happens is they have a bulk inventory. You get your food, it's in a takeaway container, and you go to your dorm room, whatever your class, and you have your lunch. The next time that you go, you drop that off for them to clean and sanitize it. So they have an ongoing inventory of these things. Where it gets a little bit more tricky is when you try to think through the grocery store example, like reusing your own bags. That's pretty challenging. Other than pushing customers to do that and communicating that, hey, you should really clean these, that's really the user level responsibility for some people, because those bags can get pretty grody, especially when you're talking about raw animal meats being in there and then getting reused for bags of leafy greens or whatever. But that responsibility really falls on the consumer that wants to do that. So it's a slippery slope, but there are absolute solutions that are feasible and able to get worked into businesses.
Yeah, I think that was some of the discussion was what is the rules, what is the data around
Yeah.
this, where is the risk, and what's the potential benefits and the trade-offs. And Sometimes it's hard to make that call and say it's always safer to we'll go the disposable route sometimes.
Yeah.
The impact you could have when you make some of these changes can be pretty big too.
When you're a coffee shop that has 50,000 stores across the world, those are big numbers, right? Even if you're talking about compostable cups and compostable sleeves and bamboo lids, those are still big numbers when you look at environmental impact, for sure.
Let me pause for a moment to tell you about our sponsor. Creative Safety Supply is a great resource for free guides, infographics, and continuous improvement tools. I recommend starting with their 5S guide. It includes breakdowns of the 5 pillars, ways to begin implementing 5S, and even organization tips and color charts. From red tags to floor markings, it's all there. Download it for free at creativesafetysupply.com/5S.
The other topic you mentioned earlier was around data collection systems. I think that will transition us nicely into your current role. My first introduction to the data monitoring tools that might be tied in was we had a freezer and we would hold our adhesives for manufacturing in this freezer to keep it frozen. And there was a power outage.
Ooh.
And what happens is they didn't know that. So power goes out, the freezer starts to unthaw, power comes back on, refreezes, and for a certain amount of time, we didn't know that adhesive was not being kept at the right temperature. To avoid that risk or to know what is the data, how long was it down, what did the temperature changes look like, they put in these little monitors, and this is probably 20 years ago. They had a way to data log that. So if there was a concern, they could pull that, look at the data and say, oh, it didn't really drop that much. We're okay, that material is fine. Without that, they basically said, throw it all out because we don't know if it's been compromised. And so that was a lot of wasted cost until those monitors got put in. That was where I first saw the ability to use this as a control mechanism, give insights into what's going on when you're not physically there or something happens, and you can troubleshoot and say, that's not a problem, or yes, it is a problem.
That is an absolute textbook scenario that is the value statement of remote temperature monitoring for the entire food supply system. And obviously, there are other sectors in the manufacturing world where it applies too. It's a big deal in pharmaceuticals, so much that it's actually codified into law in CFR, I think it's part 11, for the manufacture of temperature sensitive pharmaceuticals. For in the food industry, it's not codified to that extent. It's not part of CFR, at least in the food service world. In food manufacturing, it is part of good manufacturing that you do have monitoring capabilities and devices. But what has really changed, and I think your example speaks to this, is traditionally or historically, there were these devices that were basically just thermometers that would have a display on the outside of a refrigerator or walk-in, whatever, what have you. And I can remember in places where I worked, they had this paper dial that had a little pen that would just go around. And that's the data that it was recording. And that's how you would go back and look like, okay, did anything happen over the weekend? Let me go get that piece of paper. That's the same sort of process that was done and still is done in the majority of food service establishments. But instead of using like this dial automated, like temperature graph, like a seismograph type of thing, people just write down things on a log sheet. To your point exactly, what if you're closed for a holiday or for the weekend and don't know if there's a temperature fluctuation? The cost of the technology that enables real time or close to real time data or information or invisibility into what's going on in temperature monitoring stationary equipment has drastically dropped, which should be of no surprise. But that opens up opportunities, right? In the food retail sector, like the grocery store, a fast food restaurant, or in institutional food service, like a university. These devices, they run 24/7, 365. So it doesn't matter if your establishment is closed. And now the software that is aggregating the data that they're capturing, right? It actually can be programmed in a way that you establish what we classify as critical limits or limit deviations, where if it gets too cold, I want to know. And if it gets too warm, I want to know. Because those two scenarios have different impacts. If it gets too warm and it's food, maybe that is going to create some sort of food safety problem. Also, it could very well impact the product quality, whatever is in that refrigerator. If something gets too cold, it's the same thing around food quality. You don't want to freeze lettuce because then when it thaws, it's awful, right? It's all soft and limp and yuck, right? But if your refrigeration units go way below where they're supposed to be set, you're just throwing money out the window, right? And you're wasting energy, which leads to cost waste, right? Which leads to overuse of power, right? Which feeds into the sustainability efforts, right? You have this optimal range that you can have your refrigeration equipment set, and you want to operate within that range, say plus or minus a couple degrees. When there's a food safety problem, you want to know, but when there's a potential energy usage or product issue, you also want to know. A lot of the opportunity for optimizing storage conditions to drive unnecessary food waste. What is the optimal storage environment for ice cream, right? Now, that could actually already be identified by the ice cream manufacturer. Or are we just going to set all my freezers at negative 15 degrees? That might be completely unnecessary. Companies can have discussions, okay, with XYZ ice cream manufacturer, what's your recommended storage condition for optimum quality? That's where you start. And then you bring in your facility team to say, okay, the operating parameters of this piece of equipment are what? So we need to merge the product quality component and the equipment functionality piece. And then that is the recipe for success in that area of optimal use or run. Pretty interesting because through all of my past experience, part of the mindset is if the cooler feels warm, turn it down. Just go to the thermostat and turn it down. There isn't a lot of thought, especially by culinary professionals, the potential long-term ramifications on product quality, but also how their electric bill is going to drastically differ, right? The same thing can be applied for hot food too. It's the same mindset. If I'm an employee on a hot food line, I'm just going to turn this heater up to 10. What happens at the end of the lunch period, all the food that you're holding at 198 degrees, it's continued cooking after it came out of the oven and it's ruined. So it can't get reused for something else. It can't get diverted to some sort of program like Feeding America or something like that because it's trash. It's just all gross. So I get a little spirited sometimes about some of this stuff. It's an impassioned role that all of us play.
And I think you mentioned an example too, but some way of correlating the data to what's the actual temperature of the product.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing versus what the monitoring is saying.
Yeah, there aren't very many products that are capable of doing this on the market today. I'm sure that will change over time. So we at Testo, we just launched, the product's been on the market for a little over a year or so, but we have what we call a product simulation data logger where we will work with a customer. It's completely programmable and customizable. The focus of it is to apply a actual set of data based on real actual product temperature in the customer's equipment. So it's in their walk-in refrigerator, in their cooler, and it's their product, right? So whatever that might be, shredded lettuce, tomatoes, turkey, whatever. We gather data for 5 days, and we do that to then take all of that data, and depending on the communication frequency, it can be like 20,000 different data points. We dump that into this proprietary software code that we have. What it does is it correlates, or it provides us with what we call an offset coefficient. So the software where we are programming our high and low critical limits for the data logger, we can also program this offset coefficient So when it gets installed into a walk-in or whatever refrigeration unit, it is monitoring air temperature. It is providing simulated internal product temperature data at the exact same time based on the test we performed with the customer. The value being, right, like when you open a refrigerator door, especially a single door cooler, you would see right behind a service line, the air temperature in those units fluctuates drastically, right? In a walk-in refrigerator, the air temperature inside the unit fluctuates, but not as drastically. The curves flatten a little bit. But what happens in a large majority of establishments is doors get open and they get propped open when a delivery is here. And that delivery, it could take 40 minutes, it could take 5 minutes, who knows, right? But those temperatures all begin to fluctuate. And if the organization is only monitoring air temperature, that air temperature is drastically going to increase. The alarms are just going to start going berserk. The value of this simulated product temperature is to show, okay, if your air temperature has jumped from 38 degrees to 58 degrees, your product temperature was 37.5 degrees, it's 36. So there's no need for action. And part of what we do with this study is try to abuse the product so we can help them set adequate alarms and action points based on real potential risks, as opposed to, okay, this alarm is telling me that the cooler's at 55 degrees. Well, that's fine. The air temperature is 55 degrees. Everything inside of it is at 32. There's nothing that you need to do. It's really quite exciting. It's pretty amazing.
Because that could prevent alarms and say we have to toss this
Precisely.
food, get rid of it. But you can say, no, we have some evidence or science behind the idea that it's okay.
Precisely. And what we like to call the unnecessary alarms is alarm fatigue, right? Because what happens is that door gets open for 10 minutes, the air spikes up, an alarm happens, and then that alarm repeats. If the door stays open, it repeats. And then the employees get conditioned to ignore it. I worked at places where they had audible alarms. They would just cut the wires. Or the one place, there was a little red blinky light that would go off. They just disconnected the wires because it was annoying. I know nothing's wrong. This thing just keeps going off. It's a machine doing what it's programmed to do, but it wasn't programmed well to provide awareness or a point of action when appropriate. And that's where a lot of like our focus point now is, especially my focal point, is around educating people around the value that can provide. Like, how much time can that potentially save your organization and how much effort? If you have a 3-hour power loss due to a snowstorm or a hurricane, even during power losses, this isn't like just for our devices. I would say just about every device that's on the market today is going to have some sort of short-term memory backup. They're probably battery operated like ours. When the system is back up, there's a data dump because the data loggers don't stop recording. It's just the communication between the data logger and whether it's a gateway or depending on how the system operates, if it's a Wi-Fi data logger, whatever, when that data is dumped, then boom, that's the beauty of cloud-based computing, right? Like the data is there. You can go back and look at it. And it also gives you evidence that, say, there was a regulatory inspection going on, or you're communicating to a local health department, like, hey, we had a power loss. I've got data that all of our refrigerators, the products inside of them all stayed fine. That's a pretty quick conversation as opposed to, oh, I don't know. And having done this in grocery stores, going through a power loss and having to walk through the grocery store, taking product temperatures in each individual case of open air coolers to say, okay, we need to get rid of all of this product or we don't. That's a massive time and cost saving and unnecessary food waste savings. It's pretty cool. We have one new product entering the market over the next 6 months, and it actually does focus on the food manufacturing end of the spectrum. The impact is huge. There's a lot of research, a lot of R&D, not just with Testo, but with other organizations around rapid pathogen detection systems. we are going to be introducing one of these systems into the market that is able to do surface swab analysis in under 5 hours. The value to that, and I think it leans well into the whole efficiency conversation, is many food manufacturing organizations, it depends on the product or the commodity, but they do what's called a test and hold. They'll do a production run of something, and then all of that is packaged, boxed up, palletized, and it goes into a massive 30,000 square foot refrigerator. Then they do swabs. They might actually test product. They'll do a breakdown and a cleaning after a lot code run. The vast majority of food manufacturers have to send those swabs out for analysis to get the results back. That can take up between 3 to 5 days to get the results back. So if you can reduce that feedback loop, how that impacts the supply chain, it's pretty impactful, right? Because if it's fresh produce, you're able to extend shelf life, get higher quality products to your customers, which is all great, right? And you're not blocking up your storage space in your operation for unnecessary periods of time. There's a lot of going on with that type of technology, but it's really quite exciting. And I think the potential impact it can have as it becomes a real thing in the industry, this enhanced rapid surface microbial testing, I think these supply chain delays in time, they will start to shorten, which is fantastic because I'm sure there are ways to do huge environmental studies that would show the benefits of all of that. But the major benefit is you're able to deliver better quality, safer food to your customers faster. And that's really the name of the game in food manufacturing.
Identification of a issue and communicating that out faster. That's awesome.
Hugely important. It's an exciting time. In the food space, there are so many developments taking place. It really is exciting to be, in the industry. And I feel super privileged with the fact that I'm part of a technology organization that is trying to focus on some of these super big challenges. They can show or provide companies with data and information on how they can operate better, operate more efficiently in a more sustainable manner. I think it's a lot of fun. It's super cool.
How could people get a hold of you? We connected through LinkedIn. Is that the best approach?
LinkedIn, I guess I could provide my email address and phone number.
I'll get that and put it in the notes for the meeting. Perfect. So people have. Okay.
Ryan, this has been awesome, man.
Yeah, thanks for your time.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, we'll put all that contact information for you and links. And appreciate your time. And thanks for educating us on some of the cool new stuff coming out.
My pleasure.
Okay, thanks.
All right, take care.
If you like this topic, please check out the Lean Six Sigma for Good book series with the subtitle Lessons from the Gemba. We now have both Volume 1 and Volume 2 in paperback, ebook, and audiobook. Each volume has 8 chapters written by different Lean Six Sigma practitioners who have applied their skills to nonprofits, NGOs, not-for-profit organizations, and government agencies. Proceeds from the book sales are split evenly and go to the nonprofit selected by each author. Go to lean6sigmaforgood.com or search Amazon for Lean Six Sigma for Good. These books make a great gift for your process improvement team or someone you know who works at a not-for-profit organization.